month. Today we're going to hear from Nathan Lachine. He's going to speak on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and I'm just going to kind of read his bio. He's currently a therapeutic foster parent and community educator for coordinated care, providing trainings and resources for caregivers in Washington State. He's a community activist for foster parents and youth in care here in Washington State. He's a board of director for malesurvivor.org, Region 5, 1624 Rep. A published author, speaker, and trainer on a wide range of topics. This be the change that you want to see in the world. These are the words that have influenced his life the most. In addition to being a foster parent, he administers the largest Facebook group. It's called We Foster Washington, of potential caregivers in the state. Nathan and his husband co-founded Evergreen Caregiver Support, which provides trainings and resources for caregivers statewide. Through his various professional roles, he's launched support groups, facilitated countless trainings, spoken to legislators at the Capitol, spoken on podcasts, and participated in interviews on local and state bills. I would say coordinated care is really lucky to have him. And so are we today. So we're going to hear from him. And I'll let him take it away at this point.
Hello, amazing folks. I know it's the afternoon. I know it's kind of hard. So that's why, if you're like me, I'm on pot number 2 of coffee. So we're going to have some fun today. So we're going to be here talking about ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. We're going to be talking about kind of the study at kind of that, 10,000-foot view of it, and kind of explain a little bit about the history of it and what we've kind of come to learn from it. So this is incredibly important because it's used as a longitude study. So where some people have kind of misinterpreted it as saying, well, we did these ACEs poll for you specifically, and it says you have 5 ACEs. Well, you're going to have 10-year life expectancy shortened. You're more likely to have SUD. It's not designed to be that way, but it's kind of morphed into that of what our understanding is. So as we go through this, please remember that the original purpose and study of this is a population longitude study, not an individual study. So I love what got me in trouble as a kid now pays my bills. I get to do nothing but talking all day long. So as we go through this presentation, I am super big about just unmute yourself, ask a question. If you prefer to use chat as we're going through this. We're pretty casual here, so I love questions. I love going down rabbit holes. So ask, folks. So with that, let's get rocking and rolling. All right, can somebody just shout out or give me a thumbs up? Can you see the screen? It looks correct.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So this is coordinated care. If you're not familiar with coordinated care, we are the insurance provider for kids that are in open dependencies. We do the adoption support. We do the extended foster care. We even do the unaccompanied refugee minor program. This is who I work for. So part of one of the amazing benefits they have is a community educator like myself that gets to provide these trainings all around Western Washington. All right, folks, so let's jump in. We are here to talk about adverse childhood experiences. But before we're going to go any further, I want to share our statement of gratitude with all of you. We offer the statement of gratitude for the Indigenous lands that holds important teachings where language and culture are interwoven to create a strength and resiliency for American Indian and Alaska Native youth in care. As we gather today, we invite these teachings, and while unlearning Western ways of being that will help us better serve these youth. Land is sacred, people and environment are all connected, time is measured in seasons, comfort is in the quality of our relationships. That last one always rings so true to me because most of the work we do, the intervention is the relationship aspect of it, right? Because we have to have relationships with our clients to move forward. All right, so what we're going to be doing today, we'll be here for about an hour and 15, hour and 30 minutes or so. So if you booked it out till 5 o'clock, good for you. You can get a little self-care in at the end of the day. So what we are here today to talk about is the original kind of ACEs study. We're going to be identifying the original 10 ACEs, talk about some of the scores, and then what do those scores kind of translate into for statistical health risks. So one of the newest studies that's out there is actually talking about resiliency when it comes to ACEs, and actually talks about how you can reduce your overall ACEs score by building in resiliency factors. So the original ACEs study was one of the largest studies ever done of its kind, had a little over 17,000 participants. So pretty big segment, right? Well, what did that come out with and really tell us? Well, let's talk about that. So this original study was in 1995 through 1997, and it was down in California was where the study was taking place and where pretty much all the participants come from. So as we go through this, they were able to actually see that there was staggering proof of negative health outcomes and social economic results of having a higher ACEs score. So what does that really mean? Well, let's break it down a little. So these were the principal researchers. So what we do see out of this is that the original principal researchers came at this with trying to understand actually weight loss and weight gain. And that's what started their interest in this, to try to help understand why certain participants had gained so much weight, and understanding what caused them to bounce back after their weight loss, and what kept them staying at they actually had pretty significant weight gains of up to 150 pounds. And what was there a correlating factor between each participant? And that's where kind of these 10 original questions came from, which then evolved into our ACEs study that they went forward with in California. So what did they find? Well, ACEs are incredibly common. So they're also strong predictors of future health risks. Also, what I find most interesting is that you can also look at these, and we know that the higher your ACEs score, the more prevalence of type 2 diabetes, cancer, heart disease, up to a 10-year reduction in life expectancies when you have high ACEs scores. I found that incredibly interesting, is that what we experience in our early childhood can have negative health outcomes 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, right? That's just so amazing to me to understand, of like what we experience in our early life can impact us for so long. Now we know we can reduce those overall life ACEs scores by building in resiliency factors. There's some new studies out there that are really talking about it. It's fantastic work. But what we are seeing is these are pretty. What? Somebody say something? Oh, guess not. So what we are finding with the higher ACEs scores, some of these are associated. So SUD, what are we seeing? A lot of SUD challenges going on right now. Pulmonary obstructive disease, that's heart disease, depression, right? Illicit drug use, negative coping mechanisms, right? Think about how that bottom one. What are we seeing with a lot of people now? IPV, intimate partner violence, teen violence in their relationships, higher risk taking, which can result in having STIs and STDs, smoking, right? These are all things that we see that are associated with having higher ACEs scores. So how many of these are ringing true for a lot of the clients that you all serve? Pretty good list, pretty well comprehensive, right? So what are we talking about? So what do we mean when we say adverse childhood experiences or ACEs? Well, we're talking about childhood abuse and neglect, and that can take many different forms, right? Could be witnessing domestic violence, could be experiencing domestic violence, could also be substance use within the home, could also be the lack of hitting developmental milestones through neglect. So educational neglect, medical neglects, right? Could also be, how does that home handle mental health issues? Think about also, I really appreciate that we talk about parental loss, and we also talk about parental loss through incarceration, right? Because those can also be traumatic moments for the kids when they are separated from their loved ones. Expand upon parental loss to also include family of origin. Think about the one consistent thing we know about every kid that's in care: trauma, right? Just coming into care is a loss, is an ACEs score. So we know consistently everyone in care has trauma. Crime, what have they experienced? What's the communities that they lived in? And then also, what are some of those experiences around medical and social problems? So what we found is that when more traumatic, the more ACEs that you're going through in your life, the higher your ACEs score come in. So when they break them down, we're going to break them down into their categories. You would just, as you're doing the survey, you would just get a 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, right? And so forth. Every single one of us in this webinar right now has an ACEs score. We all do. Our ACEs score is at least one, right? Because we all lived through a global pandemic. That's traumatic, right? That how many of our kids have been impacted? How many of our kids going through their learning have been impacted? How's their social emotional skills, right? We all have had one ACEs score. One consistent thing I always notice about people that get in this line of work is that we usually have our own history of traumas, right? Because we want to see our communities do better. We want to see the next generation do better, right? Why we do this, because I know, when I come out and do trainings, I don't see a lot of Bentleys and Mercedes out in the parking lots, right? We do this because we have a big heart and we care about our community. So as we're breaking down and we're talking about abuse and neglect, well, what are we specifically talking about? Because our words have power, we need to use the shared language and definition of those words. So we have the emotional abuse. Emotional abuse can take many different forms, right? It can be from the parent being there or the parent not being there, the parent making the child feel unsafe, the parent being derogatory towards the child, parent not being emotionally available to the child, where they're just very distant. Physical abuse is probably the most common one that we can all define in our mind's eye. What does physical abuse look like? Well, that's going to be, the physical pushing, grabbing, slapping, throwing, striking, using an object to strike, causing physical harm to the child. Sexual. Sexual abuse is, again, probably one of the bigger ones we're able to all define in our mind's eye, but that is just inappropriate sexual touching, viewing, inappropriate boundaries. It's sexual abuse of the child, where it's abuse that has a sexual motivation. Neglects are much harder, and in my opinion, can be very, you know, they just stay with the kids. I can tell you, I've had so many teenagers that I work with over my 19-year career being a foster parent, and they still remember when it's all their fault. Our parents got divorced. It's all your fault. We're moving. It's all your fault. This and that. You know, emotional neglects to stay with the kiddos is what they hear. That just kind of turns into that broken record. Just keeps repeating and repeating on them. Think about those physical neglect. They're not hitting their developmental milestones. It could mean that they're not getting enough food. Could mean a multitude of things. Are they going in to see the doctor on a regular basis? Are they taking vitamins? What does that look like, right? Are they wearing potentially dirty, soiled clothes that don't fit, right? Those could all be a form of physical neglect. Housing stability, right? That can also be another form of physical neglect. What's the housing situation? When we talk about household dysfunction, what are we really talking about? Well, please forgive that this study is a little bit old, so it's still using a lot of binary terms, but it's saying mother treated violently. We know that anybody in a household treated violently, that is part of a dysfunctional household. So this study really still states mother and father on a lot of slides. Please, those are interchangeable terms. We know that a family can be of any genders. So household substance abuse, SUD, what are the kids witnessing? Right? Our first golden opportunities of knowledge with our kids is that neurodevelopment that happens from, roughly 0 to 7, right? Where that human brain is just sucking up everything that is around, because we're social creatures. So when kids are exposed to SUD in the home, they're going to know about it, whether the parents think they do or not. Within SUD, what does that look like? Is that emotionally stable? Is that not emotionally stable households? Is that, danger for the kids, right? So just kind of think about those. We talk about mental health. Well, how did the household respond to the mental health needs of them? Well, some of the caregivers might use substances to deal with their mental health problems, right? They might have negative opinions of mental health support services and don't go in for support services when they really need it. And that's been traumatic for the child or challenging for that child. Think about rates of divorce and separations, right? That is a dysfunction, that is a trauma for children, right? Losing that consistency. I really appreciate that it does call out specifically the incarcerated, because we know that there's an epidemic of families that it's generational, where parents and their grandparents, their siblings are going into our JR systems or actual justice systems where they're getting sentenced. And what does that do for the families? What supports are left there for the kids? Right? Think about just the loss of a parental figure, the challenges and the emotional trauma that causes, but what about the financial challenges that causes for the family of origin? Right? So, as we go through the original 10 ACEs questions, first one, recurrent emotional abuse. So, that would be yelling, insults, right? Humiliation, swearing at the kids, right? So, it just is raising that fear level. How many of our kids are experiencing that? How many of our kids are being told, oh, you're not as smart as your sibling, or oh, everything is your fault, or I would have been happier if I didn't have you, or those kind of things, right? Those will stay with the kids. And those verbal abuses and neglects can be as traumatizing to some of our kids as physical abuse. That was the first ACEs question. And please, folks, feel free to ask questions as we're going through. So, physical abuse. So, what is physical abuse when they're asking the question? This is what they're asking. When a parent or the caregiver is, grabbing, slapping, throwing, striking with items, leaving bruises or breaking of bones, right? That's physical abuse. That was question number 2. Question 3 is talking about sexual abuse. So again, the definition for sexual abuse that they are utilizing in this thing was children who are touched or exploited sexually. Our expansive definition of sexual abuse as we're getting into the digital age, we do need to start including digital perpetration, is that sometimes that abuse is happening through cell phones, right? Where pictures and video are being taken of the kiddo, and those are just as damaging as whether a person in the real world is taking a picture or video of the kids, right? Children can be digitally perpetrated, so we need to expand our even our legal definitions of sexual abuse. And Lisa's question 4 and 5 were about emotional and physical neglect. So, what did that look like? Well, could be they didn't get enough food, could be the house wasn't warm enough, could be clothing, it could be left alone. So how many of our youth have we worked with that have been left alone on their own devices, for hours or days on end? How many families, have left kids like that? Babysitter, look, they got YouTube, they got TikTok, right? Clothing never being the right size, not being clean. I think that call out right there about the baby staying in the soiled diapers. Think about this with babies. They learn by getting their needs met, right? So baby communicates to us through crying that they have a need that we need to meet. We meet that need. The baby then knows that we're trusting, that we're in a safe environment, that they're loved and they're cared for, right? Well, if a baby's needs aren't getting met, what are we really doing? Is we're showing that we're not trustworthy, that they're not in a safe environment. Sanitary level of the house, right? And we're not just talking like, oh, there's some dirty dishes. What we're really talking about is like, hoarder level. There's actually bugs around, there's rodents around, trash, fecal matter from animals, right? We're talking a really dirty house. Think about separation, whether that's, their actual married couple or they're not married, but just that separation. Think about the divided loyalties. What do those divided loyalties really do to a child? Even if the families, aren't trying to pick, well, do you love your mom more, or you love your dad more? Or do you love this person more? Right? Even if they're not doing any of that, just what does that do to the child? How challenging is it to say, where would you want to live? How challenging is it for just a circumstances changes where you had everybody in your house, your siblings, and now every sibling is born with a different parent, right? Just think of the consequences of that. Think of all that negative energy that those kids are being exposed to, the conversations that they're overhearing. Those, stay with kids. Think about how many kids feel like it's their fault. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have caused these problems. I shouldn't have gotten bad grades or right. Kids always kind of take things on that it's always their fault. And they don't understand is that it's not their fault, but they just heard, oh, well, my parents were arguing one time about me getting suspended from school and then now they're getting a divorce. Right. That flawed logic for a lot of our kids. The inability of our society to explore emotions and talk about how this impacts us. It's pretty interesting when you talk about youth that have experienced neglect and, what do their behaviors start to look like the older they get. And you actually find that a lot of times it's self-protective. So what I mean by that is that you might see that the kids are going to be maybe over aggressive. They might be quick to anger because they don't know other emotions. But when you can really talk with them and get to some of those root causes, you actually find that a lot of these kids are hurting. They don't have the vocabulary to talk about it because we don't talk about our emotions enough. Does everybody remember those smiley face charts that had like, the 50 different emotions with the smiley faces, so you had your basics, happy, sad, angry, those kind of things, but they had, anxious, they had all the different emotions. How many emotions can the teens you're working with label? How many of them are even connected with their own bodies, right? When they're getting upset, do they even know like what their warning signs are when they're getting upset? Are they just that disconnected or dysregulated from themselves, right? So it's basic TBRI principles, trust-based relational interventions, where really just working with the kids to get them reconnected with themselves. Fantastic books out there, Connected Child, Connected Parent. So ACE's question number 7, witnessing DV. Well, again, I apologize, it's a little bit older study, so it still is using pretty gender specific language, but it's anytime that a child is able to witness anybody being slapped, grabbed, pushed, punched, kicked, items thrown at them, anything of that nature, or if there's deadly weapons being utilized, right? Or even the threat of brandishing that weapon, right? That's domestic violence. That impacts youth. Even if those aren't being used on them, just them witnessing it impacts them. Right? So what about SUD? That is ACE's question number 8. SUD, what has the child witnessed? Right? What's going on in the home? Right? We know a lot of, unfortunately, is that, drugs and alcohol are a coping skill. I'm not a good coping skill or strategy at all, but they are a skill. And unfortunately, what are we seeing? We're seeing a pretty big rise in SUD. When youth are exposed to this at younger ages, that puts them at risk for their own exposure to it, but just witnessing it, witnessing the instability in the home caused by SUD. Okay, mental health, mental illness raised in the family, right? What does that look like? How does that specifically impact the kids, right? Again, it's how is the response within that family unit, right? How are they all responding to it? How are they telling the youth about it? What supports are they getting in that in place? Or are they everybody just, oh well, dad's this way, mom's this way, grandpa's this way, grandma's that way. And right, but what are we really talking to them about and educating them about? What supports are we putting in place for them? Because it's incredibly challenging growing up when you have a parent that has a mental health diagnosis. Right. And then number 10 is incarceration. I think this is a really important call out because we really need to understand is that what does that do for those feelings from the child? Again, we talk about the feelings. Is that child even allowed to explore their feelings? Or do we tell them, no, it's okay. Things will be fine. But what they're really feeling, are they feeling abandoned by this person? Are they embarrassed because their, parent is incarcerated? Think about the societal stigma around a parent being incarcerated, a sibling being incarcerated. Think about system involvement. What does that negative connotation in our society look like? right? How much judgment are these kids feeling? The abandonment. I don't understand why they couldn't just follow the rules to be with me. Don't they love me? Right? How do you respond to them? Are the kids allowed to talk about this with their family of origin? Are they allowed to explore how this is impacting them? Or how they're impacted by going in for visits at the jail? Or how they're impacted with the emotional roller coaster of our judicial process? All of these things we discount for kids of how they're feeling and thinking about these. We need to support them. We need to allow them to process. Folks, pause it there for a second and let's just check in. Does anyone have any questions, reflections? You're all being quiet. We got through those the original 10 aces pretty quick. Anybody have any thoughts or reflections they'd like to share with the group? Yeah, Abby, the floor is yours.
Second, then you can't find your unmute button. Um, I was just thinking what a great job you did of doing that recap for us. And I think that, many of us in social services do tend to have kind of high ACE scores. So it was, just good recap, Nathan. Good recap. I'm gonna nurse my scabs. Thank you.
Well, then just make sure you're taking care of yourself each and every day. 5 minutes of self-care every day. Put a reminder on your cell phone so you get that alert of what'd you do today for self-care. Thank you, Abby. Does anybody else have any thoughts or reflections they want to share with the group? Jump back into the presentation, but please, folks, yes.
I have something. Just a question. Recovery, let's say for adults that have experienced all 10 ACEs before the age of 2,
Mhm.
how's the recovery success rate?
I haven't seen any studies for that specifically say, like if you have 6 ACEs scores or 10 ACEs scores, what the recovery rates are. I think anyone and everyone is amenable to, treatment and supports. And the more that we start looking at some of those root causes, the better. So I think we see a lot of surface level things. We misdiagnose them, we misunderstand them when they're actually, what is that root cause of the early traumas this child's experienced? How did those adaptive processes then change from the trauma they experienced? And how do you get back to, kind of the original? So adaptive is one of our foster kids on the table with us. And
Thank
years ago, my husband would, oh yeah, no worries. My husband had the thought process, well, this child's being disrespectful, they're not having dinner with us, and just thinking the kids being mean.
You're
A lot of the
freezing
trauma
and
started at the dining room table. Oh, am I freezing?
you are freezing and cutting out a little bit, but
Okay.
I don't know if you can do anything. Probably
Technology, right?
right. Yeah,
Everything's closed. Is that any better, Sue?
I think so. Yeah, I was just gonna say to the descriptions you gave of those, um, you know, the different aces was really kind of made them come alive. I think that was really important. And we haven't really gotten to this yet, but we've taught a lot about resilience as far as a mitigating factor for ACEs in childhood and having a high ACE score. But I'm reading more and more like that. Resilience is good, but hope, learning to increase your level of hope is really really effective, and that's pretty cool that stuff is teachable. Becoming more hopeful is people that have high scores, many of them, most of them are not that hopeful, but that's something, a strategize, you can strategize to increase your hopefulness. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, I would add in there too, so talking about goal setting and being able to build on, those positives. And once you start hitting, even if you have to have a daily goal, look at that. You built that daily goal, you achieved it, building off of that. But being able to project, here's your daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly goals can be really helpful as well for survivors to not lose sight of the bigger picture and to really be able to then look back and go see all of the great things that we've done here. Look at all these things, all your successes. Because, we focus on our negatives far too often.
Right.
Love the conversation. Please don't be bashful. I know it's late on a Wednesday. So as we're getting into kind of what the ACEs, this is the ACEs pyramid. So you have the higher up your ACEs score goes, this is where we start getting into the fortunately, so you have conception at the bottom of the scale all the way to death. The more challenges, the higher your ACEs score, you actually statistically can have a lower life expectancy, sometimes of up to 10 years. So you have the original ACEs or the experiences, then you have that disruption to the neurodevelopment. The best way I can describe neurodevelopment, think about if I'm driving, I live here in Tacoma. If I'm driving all the way down to Portland, I can get to Portland in about 2 hours. For every speed bump I hit, right, I have to slow down and then I have to start back up, right? So while yes, I can still get to Portland, it might take me an extra 30 minutes because I've hit how many speed bumps. That's kind of that disruption in neurodevelopment as well. Is that we've learned is that when youth experience adverse experiences, they become neurodivergent because their brain is responding to their environment. So it's just like hitting a speed bump. They can still get to where they need to go, right? They just need to build back up again, right? We see that in education all the time, right? If you have a 10th grader, they have a 5th grade reading level, what do? You started 5th grade reading and work on 5th grade comprehension, then 6th grade, then 7th grade, right? We don't go, hey, you're a 10th grader. You should be at 10th grade level for everything. I don't know what's wrong with you. Why do we do that when it comes to youth that have experienced traumas? Do not look at a youth's chronological age. Go off of what are you seeing for their cognitive abilities, their self-coping skills, right? We meet them where they are. Then you start getting into those impairments, right? How much of our youth can get impaired? Think about just after COVID, so many of our youth are having problems with their social emotional, right? Those subtle cues, engaging in group settings, having appropriate, what we would consider appropriate age behaviors, right? They start running into more and more challenges. Next, you have the actual, health risk behaviors, and you start getting into disease. So that's why when you take high risk behaviors, could be physical high risk behaviors, could be sexual high risk behaviors, SUD. Also, just think about their personal safety. This is where, youth might not understand risk, the causality. Well, remember, I'm the generation that like parkour was a really popular thing, and that's where kids would jump off of crazy stuff, right? And you would literally have kids that would jump off of one building to another building. They thought it was cool and everything, but they didn't understand the risk. Like if you miss that jump, you fall 5 stories down, you're going to die. They don't understand those. Put themselves in dangerous situations, might start using substances. They might have seen that substances were an appropriate way of dealing with emotions or dealing with things in the home. They lean on that. All of these behaviors and challenges lead, unfortunately, to a potential early death, shorter life expectancy. So this is a couple of years old. I will send out I'll send the slide deck out to Sue. So if you need it, you can get it from Sue. My email I'll put in here if you want the slide deck. I'm more than happy to get all of these data points to everybody. So we do update these, but unfortunately they are a couple of years old for some of our ESA scores and what we're able to see.
I wanted to say, Nathan, that there's a question in the chat from Carlos Smithina with YouthNet. I think he's asking about codependency. Does that take into account if the individual has processed their past trauma? So is that if they process their past trauma, are they still more likely to have all different illnesses and have shorter life expectancy and all that stuff you just mentioned.
Well, and that's a great thing that's coming out, Carlos. Is there's actually a couple of studies that are out now, and some that are in process about reducing those ACEs scores after the fact. So that would be the processing your traumas, doing the work you need to address those. And what does that look like by building in those resiliency factors, like by getting supports for mental health, by getting yourself into, just more socioeconomics, having not isolating yourself. What do those look like? Expanding your friends group. All of those things do. I haven't seen the full studies yet. I think you can reduce those ACEs scores by layering in those resiliency, those hope factors. And I do think you can overcome a lot of things. There are some things, though, that I do say would stay with you, especially those physical neglects. There are some times where if you're not getting enough nutrition intake, that those do have, unfortunately, sometimes lifelong consequences, but you can't reduce ACEs scores. Think about youth that like I work with all the time come to us with ABC diagnoses. Some of our kids have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 diagnoses, and they're getting medications for them. What you're actually seeing, especially when you look at that overlay between undiagnosed or untreated traumas and ADHD, ADD, there's a huge overlap on what we're seeing. Are we truly seeing ADD, or are we seeing the responses to undiagnosed or untreated traumas with kids? And I've truly seen the more that we work on mental health, the more that we support and that full integration of a person, that we actually see they stop needing medications because we're not treating the root cause with medication. It's a tool. And when we start leveraging the tool with the mental health aspects of it, now we're rocking and rolling and making change versus just, oh, well, here's a medication to help you sleep or to calm you down. Well, what's the root cause of that? Is it an actual biological chemical imbalance, or is it undiagnosed and untreated traumas that we really need to support? Because let's just be honest, if you put me in another random stranger's home, I'm probably going to have some sleep challenges. That doesn't mean you give Nathan medication. It just means, what are we really getting at for the root cause? So I appreciate everybody's hand clapping and all that, because it sounds like we're all of like minds that we need to leverage, everything has a purpose, right? And when we overutilize one tool in that toolbox, that's where we run into our challenges. Yep. I see Carlos put another one.
Yeah.
Let me see. What is
Talking
it?
of you, can you see it, Nathan?
Yeah, I've got it open. I've got it open, so I'm not screen sharing. Man, Carlos, that's $1 million question. I don't know. I really don't on that one. It would be interesting to see what are some of those longevity studies of 5, 10, 15, 20 years of what do certain medications do and what are the combinations of those medications do to the to neurodevelopment. I mean, we know the brain is very malleable and responsive, so I'm sure it has some type of impacts on it. If what does that look like long term? I don't know. I know substances are very impactful, especially in utero exposures. So I'm sure there is some type of impacts. Great question.
Mm-hmm.
Right, folks. Let's go back to the presentation and keep the questions coming. And Sue, if you see something in chat and I'm not responding, just shout it out to me, okay?
Yeah. Jean Nash says, versus the damage that could occur from not taking the medicine. It's hard to measure. That's really true. Some behaviors that kids are doing are, affecting their school performance, their relationships, everything. So the medicine can be extremely helpful.
Yep, I'm a
Tough
true
call.
big believer in is that everything is a tool, and we need to have an individualized approach when we're working with the families and the kiddos, and we can't have a one size fits all approach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the hard thing we say is when we come into some of the trainings or try to make laws or policies, is that every kiddo is unique, every family situation is so unique that we need to really take an individualized approach of how are we empowering the family and how are we building off the successes. Same thing with the kids that we're working with is that we have a negative reinforcement society. So I don't get pulled over by the police officer for, hey, Nathan, you did 55 and a 55. Great job. I get pulled over for going 65 and a 55, right? Our kids hear a lot of negative messages. And if that's the only attention they know, that's what they're going to think is, oh, that's how I get my attention. Building off of positives and always focusing on those positives is so important. We need to expand that. I think all of us would agree. If we are always complimenting the kids on what they're doing good instead of what they're doing wrong, you actually see that shift for a lot of our kids. That in itself is enough to be a strategy. Well, do that with the family as well. Encourage them and thank them for what they're doing and empower them. Because let's just be honest, how many of these parents had great parents themselves? What are those generational challenges? What are the socioeconomic challenges they're facing? We need to support and empower them all and have that individualized approach to support them. Yeah, I see more chats. Yeah, Carlos, good. Yeah, I mean, I think medications do have purpose. And I think again, it's a tool in our toolbox. And we cannot rely on any one tool because each client we serve is so individual and so unique, and their situations are so unique that we need to look at a broad range of supports, which is why we have community support-based services, which we have inpatient, we have outpatients, right? We have different modalities for therapies. We have different, I mean, there's just so much that goes into it that we need to be supportive.
You see the comment from Liza, Patch and Short, behavior has a purpose.
I would 110% agree with that. I encourage caregivers to be detectives. Is that what you're seeing is, just on that surface level, is usually part of a causality of what the youth has experienced. And a lot of times our youth don't even have the right vernacular ability to articulate what they've gone through. And I think that's one of those things that we make assumptions, right? Is the behavior I'm seeing because they want to act this way or because they're going through something? Being that detective is so important.
Yeah, Liza also said they always start with the medication, but it's always good to, I think she means like look at the needs first. I'm not sure.
Yeah, sorry. It's hard for me to chat. Yeah, I was saying it's always what they always say is start with the medical piece first. You're exactly right, is that look at medication. But I love that you're talking about being curious about trauma because oftentimes we don't do that. And oftentimes that's exactly what it is. So thanks for bringing that up, Nathan.
And then Emily Greenleaf said, yes, usually to escape or gain something. As far as I think she's referring to the purpose of different behaviors. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could, Emily, be, for the behaviors, or it could be also SUD. I look at SUD as, again, what's the why behind it? And you have to be the detective to learn what is the why. Are they running from something or to something? Is there a medical component? Is there a mental health component with it? And how are you looking at it from that angle versus, oh, well, you just have an SUD problem. Okay, well, what's the whys behind it? And how do we educate, empower, and do harm reduction? Because at the end of the day, that's all we can do, right? We can educate, we can empower them, we can talk about harm reduction. The choice they make is their choice to make.
I just want to mention too, you're talking about, kids in care, and I think it's been well researched that if a child has one person that they can, who's there for them, emotionally available, physically available, all that, they will do so much better. And they will most likely do fine, versus a child in foster care that doesn't have anybody. They get moved over and over and over again, and they never have that kind of a relationship that's so important for kids to thrive.
Very much so. It's a pillar, and you can't build off of if you don't have those very consistent pillars to start with. And what we do see is that consistent person doesn't even have to be the caregiver per se. It could be a community member that they really, have gotten connected to. It could be through faith-based programs, through youth activities, through clubs, through organizations where they have somebody that's consistent. I mean, I had a person, so I grew up in the 90s. So imagine sweet, lovable gay boy Nathan in, a rural community. It was challenging for me. I was very lucky as I had a person that was in the same elementary, middle, and high school with me that worked for the school district. And he never said anything specific other than he was just a great guy. He was always consistently there in the mornings. If you weren't there, he'd ask where you were the next day. He was a person you could just, pal around with. He'd check in on you on the lunch breaks. He was a school janitor. The guy to this day never knew, and his name's Dennis, amazing person. He never knew how important it was for me. So now I had that wow. He was my person. And it wasn't he did anything special. He was just consistent. He was there. That's why this training is so important because everything we're talking about also leads to substance use disorder, could lead to self-harm ideology, could lead anywhere in these of just having that one person. What we see pretty consistently is having those community supports, having those family supports can be so critical because it gives kids consistency and somebody to latch on to. Great comments, folks. Keep them coming. All right, so I'll send this out. I know it's probably a little hard to read being on screen. So I'll just send it all out to everybody. So, we've kind of actually talked about ACEs and what we're seeing, but what we're talking about for attachment, right? Think about the attachment style in some of the families' homes that you're working with. What is that attachment? What is that? We also can refer to it loosely as a love language, right? What does that look like in that household? How was their first connection to their primary caregiver? Does anybody know what the visual acuity is of a newborn baby? How many inches they can see?
About 6 to 8.
Yep, 6 to 8 inches. 6 to 8 inches is basically from breast to the face, right? Their whole world is right here, right in this 6 to 8 inches. So even coming into care, think about how many of our children have already broken attachment because they're born in utero exposed and they're in a NICU. The best NICUs have great volunteers, great staff. Are they able to hold a baby as often as that baby wants to be held? Probably not. So that primary connection, is this world safe? What is a baby's interpretation of is this world safe? If they're crying because they're hungry, or they have a soiled diaper and they're getting checked on every hour on the hour, what if they need something 10 minutes after they're just put down and they're crying for 50 minutes? Is the world safe? Perception's reality. What have our kids gone through? So as we expand, then think about how many fantastic foster homes are there? How many homes has this child gone through? Right? What connections are they able to build with just primary caregivers? Now we go from primary caregivers, what attachment are they able to make to the community? I think that's one of those things we really discount. What is the connections that this child feels to the greater community around them, whether it be through their daycare, whether it be with their friends as parents, religious? What are those connections? Those can be so grounding for people to feel connected. Part of that greater community can help them overcome challenges. About the competency of the adults, we've talked about that a couple of times. I can tell you, a 19-year career, I've never had a parent say today's the day I'm going to be a bad parent. They're doing the very best they can. That's why we need to educate them. We need to empower them, right? Give them the parenting skills they were never given. Right? That's what all of this is. It's all about education. That's if we're breaking fundamentally down, what are we doing? We are talking about education, empowerment, and harm reduction. So I'll send this out, and this actually has some of the research around the epigenetics aspects of it. And what is it truly? Is there, is it nature? Is it nurture? What does that look like? I think, yes.
You.
Liza, did you have a question or?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Liza. We can't hear you for some reason.
I think Liza might have forgot that they're muted. Just gonna mute. Oh, there we go, Liza. I think that was just a false start. All right. So I think this is one of the many aspects that'll be interesting to see is, there are genetic components to everything. And I think it's one of those things that we're truly learning. How do the genetics, give us predisposition? What does it look like for some of us? And how powerful is it? Is it the nurturing of the environmental exposures, and that's what determines a lot of our outcome? Is it a combination, or are we genetically predisposed? So there's some great research out there. I'll send this, you'll have the link from Sue or myself in there if you want to deep dive some of this research on the genetic aspects. But I think there's a combination there. I feel like we know of genetic information that's passed along. Genes can predispose us for health concerns. So why couldn't genes predispose us for some mental health challenges? Okay. So we're going to watch a TED Talk from just fantastic TED Talk. You'll have the link for it. Probably won't watch the full TED Talk on this. So when I start it, if Sue, you can just tell me yes, you can hear the sound or not. I put sound should on. All right, give me one quick second, folks. It's not letting me put sound in. Always something with technology, right?
Mhm. This happens to everybody, Nathan, so don't feel bad.
Yeah, no, I'm getting a weird error message from Teams. And
In the chat, Amberly Fazy says, I have another meeting, to get to, but thank you. And then Adrian Fleming says, usually untimely, that, problems with technology is usually untimely.
yeah, they usually are, and they don't make sense at times. So I've looks like we've got it fixed now. So let's watch this TED Talk. And Sue, just let me know if the audio is coming through.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, I'm David Miliband, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. Our humanitarian...
Yeah, we can hear that.
The CDC and Kaiser Permanente discovered an exposure that dramatically increased the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. In high doses, the immune system, hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. Folks who are exposed in very high doses have triple the lifetime risk of heart disease and lung cancer, and a 20-year difference in life expectancy. And yet doctors today are not trained in routine screening or treatment. Now, the exposure I'm talking about is not a pesticide or packaging chemical. It's childhood trauma. Okay, what kind of trauma am I talking about here? I'm not talking about failing a test or losing a basketball game. I am talking about threats that are so severe or pervasive that they literally get under our skin and change our physiology. Things like abuse or neglect, or growing up with a parent who struggles with mental illness or substance dependence. Now, for a long time, I viewed these things in the way I was trained to view them, either as a social problem, refer to social services, or as a mental health problem, refer to mental health services. And then something happened to make me rethink my entire approach. When I finished my residency, I wanted to go someplace where I felt really needed, someplace where I could make a difference. So I came to work for California Pacific Medical Center, one of the best private hospitals in Northern California. And together, we opened a clinic in Bayview Hunters Point, one of the poorest, most underserved neighborhoods in San Francisco. Now, prior to that point, there had been only one pediatrician in all of Bayview to serve more than 10,000 children. So we hung a shingle, and we were able to provide top quality care regardless of ability to pay. It was so cool. We targeted the typical health disparities: access to care, immunization rates, asthma hospitalization rates, and we hit all of our numbers. We felt very proud of ourselves. But then I started noticing a disturbing trend. A lot of kids were being referred to me for ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But when I actually did a thorough history and physical, what I found was that for most of my patients, I couldn't make a diagnosis of ADHD. Most of the kids I was seeing had experienced such severe trauma that it felt like something else was going on. Somehow, I was missing something important. Now, before I did my residency, I did a master's degree in public health. And one of the things that they teach you in public health school is that if you're a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write that prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics, or you can walk over and say, what the hell is in this well? So I began reading everything that I could get my hands on about how exposure to adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. And then one day, my colleague walked into my office and he said, Dr. Burke, have you seen this? In his hand was a copy of a research study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. That day changed my clinical practice and ultimately my career. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Anda at the CDC, and together they asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Those include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every you would get a point on your ACE score. Was they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. Two things. Number one, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America. Well, of course, this makes sense. You know, some people looked at this data and they said, come on, you have a rough childhood, you're more likely to drink and smoke and do all these things that are going to ruin your health. This isn't science. This is just bad behavior. It turns out this is exactly where the science comes in. We now understand better than we ever have before how exposure to early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear.
Knock, knock. Hi there. I'd love to show you what a K-12 powered school is really.
But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So for me, this information threw my old training out the window, because when we understand the mechanism of a disease, when we know not only which pathways are disrupted, but how, then as doctors, it is our job to use this science for prevention and treatment. That's what we do. So in San Francisco, we created the Center for Youth Wellness to prevent, screen, and heal the impacts of ACEs and toxic stress. We started simply with routine screening of every one of our kids at their regular physical, because I know that if my patient has an ACE score of 4, she's 2.5 times as likely to develop hepatitis or COPD. She's 4.5 times as likely to become depressed, and she's 12 times as likely to attempt to take her own life as my patient with 0 ACEs. I know that when she's in my exam room. For our patients who do screen positive, we have a multidisciplinary treatment team that works to reduce the dose of adversity and treat symptoms using best practices, including home visits, care coordination, mental health care, nutrition, holistic interventions, and yes, medication when necessary. But we also educate parents about the impact of ACEs and toxic stress the same way you would for covering electrical outlets or lead poisoning. And we tailor the care of our asthmatics and our diabetics in a way that recognizes that they may need more aggressive treatment given the changes to their hormonal and immune.
So what do we think of that video? There's still probably another 10 minutes or so. I really appreciated the thought process of, well, you can just keep diagnosing and giving the kids medications, or you can look at that one. So I really appreciate that. That's kind of the thought process with it. But did you pick up on the individualized, whole holistic kind of community approach that Nadine was talking about? But that it wasn't like a one size fits all, that they tried different ways, but it was also about education and about looking at everything from that lens and not making assumptions. Yes, I will make sure, I'll send the email out, make sure everybody has the video link. As you can tell, it's obviously a YouTube video that I really should try to down. Great TED Talk on it. Just, that's the point I want to make, is think about outside of the box and thinking about that whole holistic approach to everything. And that's what they were doing here, is what's the community approach? And everything has its place and its point, just like medication, but that needs to not be our primary go-to for when we're working with our families. We need to look at the whole holistic family approach. What education and empowerment opportunities do we have there? What are the family successes that they've overcome? How can we celebrate and empower them? And how can we continue to level them up and support them?
Nathan, Leah is mentioning that, asking if when you have the time to please check out our Survey Monkey and tell us how we did. We'll have a follow-up email that will go out later, include the survey link as well as the link to today's recording and probably your slides. And it gives a link at the bottom. And then Silas Young is said that's a great video, and they're asking that you pass along the YouTube link. And I think you said you would do that, so that's great.
Yep, we'll make sure all of that's in the email I'll send once we're done. So we will have that today. So
great, thank you, Nathan.
So when we're talking about kind of those ACEs and those traumas, I think we really can think of what is it, we see on the surface, but look at what we can't see on the surface. So I really like this one. This is available. You can download it. Out of everything we've really talked about, I'd encourage everybody to pick this one out. Remember, this is like what we see on the surface. What's a contributing factors to it? And I just think that's so important because we're only seeing part of it. And what have they experienced? What are the lack of community supports? What is his educational, economic opportunities, right? What's the community response to IPV? Like all of those things. And then we have our surface level items that we can see kind of with this tree. What we're talking about. Those are basically the 10 questions that were asked in the original ACEs study. On this one, though, this is something new on the tree that we hadn't talked about, was homelessness. That housing instability is challenging and it can be an ACEs score, right? So just a great presentation one. Highly recommend printing it off. Focus on it. And try to take that lens of going to those root causes, right? Where can we get to the root causes? What are they experiencing within the communities? What's those generational aspects? We want to provide that level of support, right? And how do we provide that? By getting to the root cause and to help support and build from there. Right. So how it can affect these 7 domains? Big one we see a lot of times is really going to be those emotional and behavioral control and regulation, right? That's an effect of the trauma that they have gone through. Right? Think about attachment. How many of our kids have poor attachment abilities? Either they over-attach or they under-attach, right? Think about some of the cognitive impairments of, they become neurodivergent because they've hit more speed bumps. Remember that example I said, like I can get from Tacoma to Portland in 2 hours? If I keep hitting a speed bump, it slows me down and it takes me a while to pick back up, and I'll still get to Portland. I might just be a little late. Same thing here. How many of those speed bumps have those kids hit? Treehouse, the educational advocacy organization here in Washington State, estimates for every school move, a child loses up to 6 months of education. So that's just from moving schools. Right? Know that is going to impact them. Doesn't mean they will never catch up to their peers in education. It just means, right, we have to meet them where they are, build them back up to take care of that deficit they've experienced.
Right. Nathan, Jean Nash is sharing a link here that for the same video with Nadine Burke Harris that doesn't have ads. So just for everyone to notice that. What's that?
Oh, just the Jean showing off. She got the no ad version. Thank you, Jade. I think it's important to add parental depression along with maternal due to certain family dynamics. Yeah, I think I would definitely. I think we need to look at and expand upon. What are some of the challenges that the family's facing, and how does that impact into the youth? So I would definitely agree. The more that we can expand upon that, and also remember too, is that some things we might view in our cultural and societal and parental lens might not be the same for other cultures and other family groups. Right? We might interpret things a little bit differently, right? And that's where we talk about our DEI lens and making sure that we have racial equity in the forefront of everything we do, where we might be misinterpreting something, and that's not an ACEs score to this family, but we might think it is just because of different things. So we always need to bear that in mind in all the work we do. And expansive that this isn't, set in stone. The ACEs study has been revised. There's a longer questionnaire version now. We now have studies saying you can actually build back and take away some of those ACEs scores later in life. So one big thing I want to remember is how valuable the human mind is and the human body, right? We respond to our environments. We respond to negative environments, we respond to positive environments. We can always change, learn, and grow and develop. So, what is being trauma informed? Well, really, what you're really talking about is building trust, building that relationship. That's why I really appreciate the coordinated care statement of gratitude, talking about the quality of the relationships, right? Because that's really true. Building that relationship is the intervention, is the primary goal, right? We can't do anything unless we have a relationship built with them of trust, building that. Understanding that a lot of times what we're seeing is going to be the side effects of the trauma of that person, and that these are coping or survival skills that may have kept them alive, right? We have to remember that and not demonize those skill sets. Hoarding is a huge issue that a lot of families run into with kids that are in care. You need to honor that might have been the only way this kiddo was going to get food for that day or that week, or that's how their siblings were going to get fed. And understanding when you're coming at it from that aspect, then, oh, well, they're just being, a kid just trying to spoil their dinner by going in the fridge and grabbing something. Well, they probably grabbed the food they could because that was maybe the only time they're going to get fed. Right? Understanding it from that perspective, that this was a skill that helped them cope and helped them survive. And now we need to teach them a new skill because they don't need that one anymore because there's always food in that fridge, right? We need to always maintain our emotional balance. I think it's incredibly important is that we don't overreact to situations because guess what? If you're high level and your lid is flipped and you're very emotional about these things, how are you going to regulate that kiddo? How are you going to support that kiddo and understanding what they did? Here's a better way of getting what your needs are met. Not yelling and screaming and triggering them because they went in the fridge to grab something when dinner's in 15 minutes, but understanding that this might have been how they made sure they got fed. Right? So if you're yelling and screaming at them, now you're triggering them as well. Have you really gotten to a root cause? No, you're just causing more trauma. Understanding what those trauma triggers or responses could be, and they could look like almost anything. Avoidance of family get-togethers, could be avoidance around food, could be avoidance around bathroom, could be avoidance in the room, right? All of these have triggers, and a lot of times our kids don't even know what their trauma responses are. That's why it's so incredibly important that you play detective. We had a child that was with us for 3 years. I call him a child. He was a teenager. We figured it out by the time they were 17. During the holidays, usually middle of October through December, they were just really on edge. They were really having challenges, very much disruptive, school challenges, home challenges, those kind of things. It took us 3 years to figure out the why. And their trigger was pumpkin spice. Probably all of you are like, pumpkin spice? What's up with pumpkin spice? Well, this kid was pretty severely physically and sexually assaulted by a specific family member that only came around during the holidays. Their brain had incorporated the smell of pumpkin spice that's only around the holidays as a danger. That was their trauma trigger. And even at 15, 16, 17 years old, with the support of counseling and therapists, it took them years for us all to figure this out. So our youth might not even know that they're having a trauma trigger. I think I saw a hand raised. Rod?
Yeah. Adrian Fleming is mentioning it's important to add paternal depression along with maternal due to certain family dynamics and referencing the ACE tree. Yeah, perinatal mood disorder is very common, and pregnant and postpartum moms, but it's also quite common for the partner. Or the person that's also involved, and uh, they need also treatment and help, and um, to get through that, because if you have a new baby and they are starting to smile and coo and look at you and you're fighting back tears and all you can do is just exist for that day, you don't have appropriate reaction to this baby's socializing behaviors, then what does that baby's brain do? It kind of shuts down. It kind of says, well, I don't get any feedback here, so why bother? Yeah.
Looks like we have a
And
hand
then
raised.
Carlos is mentioning, could this also be some cause for seasonal depression, adverse experience that happened during specific seasons? Yeah, I think that's what you were referring to, Nathan.
Yeah, it wasn't so much that your body recognized a seasonal change, it was really the trigger of the smell of pumpkin spice. But definitely you can have, I mean, just think about how many of us have moments in our life that we look back on around anniversaries, around things, and either they're positive or negative feelings, right? And if you went through, parental separation, divorce, or I can tell you almost all of my foster kids know the date they went into foster care, dates of when family members had things happen to them or when they had things happen to them. And those are really challenging. Those aren't ACEs for them.
Mm-hmm. Adrian Fleming is saying in young adult relationships, when pressure of the child rearing causes breakups and traumatic experiences for all parties. Um, yeah, that's exactly right. Tamara says my supervisor sent me the link to this training. I was wondering if you can email all the information to my email that I can provide it to you. Yeah. Um, So are you on you didn't, Tamara, you didn't receive the email about this training? Because we can sure add you to our list, the list of folks yeah, why don't you provide your email address at some point? I don't think our email address we have, yeah, good, Emily. Do you have, um, Emily, do you have a way of getting her email address? Can tomorrow share that?
I will put my email address in the chat and you can email me that way if you'd like, or if you're comfortable, you can just pop it in the chat and I'll take it down, whatever you're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, Emily and Emily Greenleaf and Melinda Lazavoy are work with me. We're all on the trauma and resilience team at the health department. So, oh, thanks, Tamara. Great.
And Sue, looks like we've got a hand up.
And somebody's doing a thing, I think tomorrow somebody's doing a thumbs up. Maybe that's Emily reacting to the email address. So very good.
Rod Young, did you have something you'd like to add to the conversation?
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much. This is really, really awesome training. So thank you. So good information. Appreciate it. So
Yeah.
All right, as we're coming down to the the final couple of minutes, please ask questions. Anything we can do to support you in this knowledge journey we're on. But the big things are, what can we do now? Well, we want to try to understand and play detective as much as we can, get to root causes, understand what's working, what's not working for the whole family. I think the real important thing that gets in this is that just because the youth of the family had maybe a lukewarm or bad experience with one service provider, guess what? There's a whole bunch of service providers out there. Guess what? There's a whole bunch of different modalities that can be used for support services. Guess what? Taking a whole holistic approach and looking at the whole family unit is incredibly beneficial. Making sure that we're educating, empowering, doing harm reduction in everything we do, right? Look at everyone as a unique individual because they are all unique, right? We understand is that ACEs scores can be predictors, but they're not set in stone. They're not guarantees, right? We understand that a lot of what we see is surface level. We need to deep down and go for looking at what is truly causing these behaviors, what's causing these challenges, and how can we as a community care provider support them in their learning and their growth. So that's what I have for you folks. If you're like me and you like to really deep dive, I've got all the references here. I'll get this all out later today before I call it for the day. So Sue will be able to upload it and you'll all have access to everything on there. I do want to open it up this last little 5 minutes or so. Is there any thoughts, reflections, or questions I might be able to answer?
I want to, Adrian Fleming is asking, does the trauma and resilience team offer ACEs support groups? That's a wonderful question. We have not, we haven't done that. We have offered to various groups, listening circles. We've done that at various times where it's a practice of indigenous people, well, it's been happening for centuries, the listening circles. Like, it's a very old practice where people share, there's certain questions, and then people share their responses to different questions, and are actually listened to, completely listened to for like 2 minutes, and then each person has that time where they have the floor and they can express how they're feeling, what their thoughts are, and all that kind of stuff. And then we kind of look at themes at the end of that listening circle, and it's really incredible to be listened to, very you know carefully listened to for that amount of time for all those different questions. And then it's also so it's a great thing for the people who are listening when it's your turn to listen, and also it's a great thing for the person who's speaking to be really heard. So yeah, Nathan's giving his email address. Carlos says thank you, and so does Silas Young. About the listening circles, I'm not sure if we can maybe start doing those more. We'll pass it along if we can. So Stephanie's saying thank you for all the information, very, very helpful. And then Adrian says, as a new housing navigator, I'm working on creating my own resource guide for reference with working with clients, is why I asked. Thank you for your time and expertise today. Thank you for sending your email, Nathan. That's from Cheyenne. And Jean Nash, this was a great revisit to ACEs. So glad I attended. Nice presentation, and I appreciate everyone's insightful input. Yeah. And Nathan says, thank you all, folks, for being here and spending your afternoon with me discussing ACEs. Tamara says, thank you. This was really great. I really enjoyed it. I like how you talked about ACEs, and that's a serious subject, but you made us feel hopeful. It was not like super depressing. I think you were able to share hopefulness with people, which I think that's really awesome, Nathan.
There's always hope. No matter what we've been through, no matter, what we're going through, there's always hope. There's always that light at the end of the tunnel. And I think the more we can show and honor that of what people have been through and how we can build off of their unique successes and their accomplishments, because everyone has those. We just need to always be positive reinforcement and just continue to be those amazing caregivers and those amazing community partners that all of you are, right? Support ourselves, be kind to ourselves, and just keep doing what we're doing, folks. Appreciate everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nathan. Yeah. Tomorrow, and Aaliyah, say thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. And Nathan's mentioning self-care. Self-care is so important for people who are helping people who have gone through trauma. There's such a thing as vicarious trauma. Witnessing other people's experiences of trauma can affect us all. And so, and we have another person who Army wants it's sent to her email. Yeah.
Just took that
Nathan
down.
has
Thank you.
What's that? You got it?
I just noted the other email.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and Nathan's talking about having a training on vicarious trauma. It's a real thing. It's like it's a big deal. So thank you again for coming. Appreciate it. Have a nice evening. Thank you, Nathan, so much.
Thanks for having me, Sue. Always fantastic. Glad to be here. These honestly are very near and dear to my heart when I get to do things. And, this is all about systemic change. And that's what we're doing here, right? Incremental change.
Right.
All the amazing folks. So you have a good one. Look forward to our next time.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a nice evening.